We're here sitting in front of a beautiful model of the Aston Martin Residences in Miami. And I'm here to talk to you about Aston Martin's design philosophy and how it applies to architecture. How did this project come about?
It was a long time in coming about initially, because I think, the family and G&G, we spent a lot of time talking to each other about whether we should do this or not. And that's a really important factor to this, because Aston Martin will only partner with the best. So we took our time to realize that G&G and the family are simply the best in terms of how they wanted to execute this wonderful building. The architecture of the building, who was going to be involved, and how much of a commitment they would make to Aston Martin as much as we make to G&G and the development. So the gestation period was probably about 18 months of should we do it, can we do it, why would we do it, if we do it, what will it be, how do we simply make 1 and 1 equal 3? And I think that started on the right point, and that made us assess, look, think, is the building going to be unique? Yeah. For sure it is, within the skyline of Miami. Will it change the skyline of Miami? And for sure it has. It's a very unusual building in its form and layout. It sits in a fantastic location on Biscayne Bay. You have frontage and then the channels through the waterways that you look at. The way it is oriented in terms of sunset, sunrise is magnificent. And then obviously the form of the building. So, the why was that I realized this was going to be a game changer in terms of the skyline of Miami. And that doesn't happen very often, where you have the opportunity to work with an architect and a group of developers, G&G Development, that is going to change the face of something. So that's the why. And sure we have. For sure we have.
I guess it's really interesting to find out how much you applied Aston Martin sort of values to the building as a whole, because just simply branding something isn't obviously enough, and you have to go quite deep. And a building is such a colossal structure. What sort of level did you sort of say you wanted to engage with it at?
It's an important point you bring up, because again, in that early meeting, we said we're never going to just apply the wing to this building. And that was fundamentally the if you like, the datum line, the ground line between both of us, to say this is not just about a wing on the building. It has to stand for Aston Martin values. It has to be measurable against a 108-year-old company. It has to be measurable against an institution, which is Aston Martin, which has been renowned for handmade, extremely well-crafted, beautifully designed cars for 108 years. And so when you start at that point, applying the philosophy then was I'm not going to say it was easy, but when I watched Rodolfo sketching and he watched me sketching, there was a synergy between how we would try and develop forms and shapes. And I think that was the most important part of this. I remember we had one of the kind of opening parties where we showed the final resolution, the final models, and there was a sketch of Rodolfo's and a sketch of mine. And even the pen lines had a similarity. And we talked very much about aerodynamics, believe it or not. There is so much aerodynamic knowledge involved in a building, just in terms of airflow, wind noise. You're pretty high up in the sky, and therefore wind affects the building in a very, very different way, particularly where it was. So everything we did, the aerofoil section, the fact that the building has form and shape, and there's an elegant line to the building, was important in that makeup between ourselves. So, how do you apply the fundamentals? We stand for beauty, we stand for proportion, we stand for quality above anything else, and we stand for craftsmanship. So apply that to the building. Is it beautifully proportioned? Yes. Does it stand out? Is it unique in the way it applies the language of the building to the area that it's in? So all of those things from the very beginning were fundamental to the creation of the building.
You talked about proportion there, and how important obviously proportion is to the design of a car and working with the golden section. Architecture is proportion writ large, essentially. There's no sort of getting away with it. A building has to look precisely right. How closely did you sort of discuss these things with Rodolfo when you were creating the?
I mean, to the point where I think Rodolfo and I shared quite a few bottles of red wine with the team as well. And you know, I think when you have two creatives together, and those two creatives are aligned with a direction, there is a magic, you know, and there was for sure a magic, and we are very close friends. And I think that's important, because we then started to talk about what are the things that we would have to do with this building to make sure it could stand being called Aston Martin Residences. What are the things that I could affect and inspire and influence Rodolfo to do? I'm not an architect, you know, I'm an aesthete in one arena, but I can apply my knowledge and suggest and talk. So very early on, from the very early sketches, there was a kind of cross-fertilization of ideas that happened. And I think you can see that in the building. You know, it would have been much easier to give this a different profile, a different section, do something different. But there's a synergy between the feeling of an Aston Martin and the building itself. You know, there's the way that it sweeps up. So proportionally, you know, you've got a smaller footprint than the middle of the building. And that creates some dynamic, which you see in all of our cars as well. So I think, for me, that was important, and they're the things we talked about. They're the things we talked about, the influences. What will the night vision be? What's going to be the signature? Yeah. You know, this cutaway that happens with the infinity pool, how is that going to be a signature, and why should it be a signature? I think you have to bear in mind that most buildings surrounding the residences are lower than that infinity pool. Right. So actually your skyline shot is this area upwards, because everything else sits below that. So all of those things were part of the conversation very, very early on. It
seems to me it's the type of building that you could reduce to just a few lines and be very instantly recognizable in the same way that you can do with a car design, which is not something you can say for most sort of skyscrapers, I guess.
No, and I think that is a very, very valid point, because what I always try to do with Aston Martin design is exactly that, is make sure that the form is recognized by one single sweep, whether it's Vantage with its single arc from front to back, and then this S curvature on the back for the rear light graphic, or this connection with DB11 between the side and the rear haunches, or even Valkyrie, which is a simple flowing line and has very much the curvature and elegance of this building as well. You should be able to describe it with just the most minimal of lines to show you what the character of something is.
Let's move from the sort of the major level down to the micro level and talk a little bit about sort of the touch points of the building and how you've brought this sort of created a holistic experience of Aston Martin inside the building.
The most important thing is it should never be obvious. It's never a literal translation of what Aston Martin stands for. It's always with a degree of subtlety, or a degree of looking at the materiality of something, or the spatial awareness that you would have, or the kind of, well, why is it like that? Well, this is interesting. Now I get the connection. And some of those touch points, for instance, we worked a lot on the access to the garaging, just as an example. And this will probably never happen, but the knowledge that if you approach that garage with your Aston Martin, the breakover angle for the front of your Aston Martin is perfect. Any other car, you may scrape the front, but an Aston Martin will go up perfectly at the right speed. And I think those little subtleties that as you come into the atrium, we wanted this very, very kind of calm environment, but very powerful environment. So the atrium is double height, great light, the materials that are used in there, again, to suggest the environment we're in as well. Yeah. Miami is a hot and humid place for a lot of the year. So choose materials which are befitting of that, but also work for Aston Martin, the marbles, the travertines that we hand select as well, that are placed in here, the leatherwork, the detailing down all of the communal corridors that are hand sewn. You know, and all those examples are exactly the touch points that you'd have on the inside of an Aston Martin. You get inside an Aston Martin, and you can smell the leather and you can feel the stitch. It's exactly the same here as you approach a door handle, as you come into the atrium. There's just a feeling. There isn't a massive wing that tells you this is Aston Martin, but there's a subtlety and a feeling that I'm in the same space as the space inside my car, or the mark of Aston Martin and what it stands for.
Have there ever been any buildings that you've experienced yourself or admired that have influenced the way you approach automotive design?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I was growing up as a young designer, that Richard Rogers in London was doing some incredible buildings where it became the internal components put on the outside of the building. And for me, it was groundbreaking, because all of a sudden you see a building in a very, very different light. But Renzo Piano, as well, as I was growing up as a designer, greatly influenced by some of the positioning of the buildings that Renzo's done and where they are and what they stand for. And of course, Sir Norman Foster, changing the skyline of London in the way that he did. So there has always, for me, been that connection, because I think, all buildings are one-off prototypes, and therefore the amount of detail and energy that goes into their design is so important. And of course, we build a limited amount of cars. Sometimes we only build one.
Yes.
Sometimes we only build two, and it's exactly the same process of making sure something is individual, it really represents the brand, and it's unique. And with architecture, that's exactly what you get. I've always been fascinated by, I could keep going on and on, all the way back to Frank Lloyd Wright or Tado Ando. I'm a fan of architecture, and I think, partly because that's, we talk about cars as we talk about architectural design in cars because it's human. There is a human scale to it. And of course, a building is exactly what it is. It's a piece of architecture for human beings. And I think that's why I love them. And that's why I do think there's a direct connection to the vehicle, whether it's 2 plus 2, or in a DBX 5 people, there's a human element, therefore there's an architectural element to what we do in car design.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright there, and I know that he had a crack at car design, and many architects from Le Corbusier onwards have been sort of frustrated car designers and have dipped their toe in that water, and I wondered if you've a bit of a frustrated architect.
Yeah, well, there probably is, but then, rather than do it myself, I work with an expert. And if you can influence an expert, and if you can have great conversations with an expert that can inspire me as well, from the thinking, the connection to materials and spatial awareness. And I think that's, again, frustrated architect, probably. And maybe one day that's where I end up, who knows? But I'm just fascinated by the process. And again, there's scale. So we're working at a scale when you're developing a building, and you're typically looking at it on a monitor. Yeah. Sometimes you might see it on a power wall, but you're never going to see it full size. Yeah. Therefore, you have to augment reality to look at the building in position, but you still never really see or know the power. And I know, having visited the site very early on, the power of this building on the site. And I have a greater advantage. Yes, we start in scale. Yes, the sketches start small. But very, very soon I see my vehicles in full size, so I can understand. And I think that's, the learning going both ways was, how do you quickly get to that? How do you augment to make sure this is real? And I think some of the great things that, I would challenge Rodolfo with were, well, how big is that balustrade? Yes. Oh, let's stand next to it. Oh, actually, it's a little bit bigger than I imagined. No, it can be lower. Yeah. There's a legal it's exactly the same. There's a legal legislation framework, exactly the same for us. So I think in challenging everything, then if you both work together, you find a greater solution. And typically with many of the areas downstairs in the lobby, the atrium area, the communal corridors, the infinity pool area, that we challenged each other a lot in terms of, how could we get this better? How could we make this really impressive? And I would notice at some of the meetings we have out in Miami, Rodolfo would show me, and then I knew if I smiled straight away, he'd be too happy. So I'd just pause a little bit. Are you sure we want it like that? Well, maybe we could better it, so.
Architects are often, in my experience, obsessed about detail, but there's no comparison when it comes to creating a car interior and creating a building, because the touch points and the actual human interaction with a machine is so incredibly important, especially with an Aston Martin. Now, do you think Rodolfo is jealous of your sort of ability to influence every single millimeter of a design?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the brilliant conversations we had, because we talked about how do we, rather than 10 millimeters as a plus minus in architecture, let's talk about 1 millimeter as a plus minus. And if we get to 5, we're 50% better than any other building that's ever been designed. And I think, therefore, that's what we challenged. You know, how can we get the gap finer? How can we reduce how can we remove the visible fixings? Yeah. How can we get these balustrades to work? Yeah. And it was never the first answer. It was quite often the 7th answer. You know, but how can we do this so you don't see the fixing? Oh, that's going to be really difficult. Yes. But the answer came back, okay, let's give it a go. And, you know, throughout the whole process, when we'd meet in Miami and I'd say, actually, here I'd like this type of marble, there was never a, no, we can't do that. It was like, okay, where do we source it from? How do we get that? How do we place it? How do we cut it? What's the size of each slab? Where should it be facing? How is the edge treated? So exactly that. How do we make every single millimeter count on the inside of the building?
And we're talking here about the common parts and the places where all the residents will experience. But as we look at the model, you can see that above the infinity pool, there is a collection of very impressive penthouses, all of which have 360-degree views of Miami and its surroundings. And Aston Martin, I believe, are launching a special signature collection for buyers of those penthouses to work with you. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about this process.
Yeah, that's it. It's if you came to the car company, you could buy standard. No Aston Martin is standard. Just to put it in context, 108 years of Aston Martin's existence, we've made 100,000 cars. That's 2 days of production for Toyota. So we make rare cars. Even in our non-limited production cars, they are rare. You know, 6,000 cars a year for us at the moment their cars are rare. But if you want something even more exclusive, then you come and talk to Q within Aston Martin, and you can have anything from your own bespoke body and interior to your own bespoke colors, stitch, patterns, materials on the inside. We can turn a 2+2 into a 2+0. We can really individualize and personalize and make your car bespoke to you. So above the infinity pool, it's exactly the same process. If you have Aston Martin as a core below that, if you want something individually designed for your taste, your signature, then we can develop it with you together. And that can be as much as allow us the freedom to do everything, or just tell me that this is my favorite material, this is my favorite color, and allow us to influence that for you. But it really is the client working with Aston Martin Design to develop the signature apartment.
You must be quite excited about that prospect.
Yeah, I am. I mean, the only thing is I'm never going to get to live in one of those apartments, but really excited because they are, as you mentioned, you know, 360-degree views of Miami that no one will have seen before, because no building has been this high in this position. So they're unique views. And, you know, therefore, living inside and outside of that apartment is so important because of where you are. You're going to spend more time on the outside, probably, than the inside. And therefore, that the whole combination of what do you do on those balconies? What do you do on your veranda? How does that work with the inside of the building, of the apartment? How do you really make it unique, but also keep it in, if you like, in tune with the rest? Yeah. So one isn't going to stand out because they're all signatures of Aston Martin, and they may be individual and unique, but they'll all have a certain flavor, a certain DNA.
You can assume that if you're buying a penthouse in this building, you will be quite a fan of the brand anyway, I suspect, and there'll probably be some interaction already, perhaps, with some of these people.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, it's been a journey so far, you know, and not a long journey in terms of building development. You know, next year the apartments will be open, people will be living there. And so that's an important factor for me. And yeah, for sure, some of those customers we've had the conversations with, and we know them through other things. Valhallas have been involved and Vulcans have been involved in some of these conversations. So we already know some of the customers and some of their feelings and tastes. And, Aston Martin can go from an exposed carbon fiber body to the most beautifully painted ultramarine black, which is the darkest of dark blues. And that's a very subtle difference, because exposed carbon and a dark blue, they're not too far apart, but there's a subtlety and a difference. And actually, they both stand for something completely different. Exposed carbon body, beautiful paint, is so different, but they're so similar if you looked at them from 50 meters.
Yeah, I mean, it interests me, certainly sort of a fan of architecture myself, as to the potential that you have within these individual apartments for doing things which go beyond what a conventional architect, I guess, might do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the great thing. And again, there's a trust. Yeah. There's an element of trust. So I know Rodolfo isn't going to go, no way, don't let them do it. He's going to say, great, because this is really it's the wrong word, decoration on top. This is really the holding of the jewel in its setting. So this is if you buy a jewel, then you have to set it in something. Yeah. So in a way, the building is the jewel, and this is the setting that holds the jewel. This is slightly reversed, but that's how you would then consider what we do above the infinity pool.
I mean, you talked about finishes just then, and I was also wondering that a lot of the skills that you have here at the factory, whether it's with carbon fibre or with leather or other sort of contemporary materials, do you think you'll be able to get the opportunity to bring those into an architectural interior?
Oh yeah, for sure. And part of the skill of Aston Martin is having a team of designers that are the best colorists in the world. Their knowledge of color, their knowledge of materials, and not just leather, carbons, future generation materials, lightweight materials, therefore structures, 3D printing. I imagine some of these residences will have 3D printed, maybe ornaments, maybe tables, maybe furniture. So bringing our knowledge and technology for sure into those apartments is going to be vital. And I have a team of experts who are every single day thinking about what is the next color. What is a color that will last for 50 years? Yeah. What is a color that will shock someone, but not to the point where it's out of favor in a couple of years? That, wow, this is the next trend, the next great thing. Yeah. So I've got a team thinking about that on a daily basis. So that's actually what you get if you come to Aston Martin to have your apartment designed. Yeah.
It's always interesting to me, that distillation that you get within a design studio, where you're looking at all these different facets of contemporary sort of visual culture and design culture, and distilling, like you say, and trying to ascertain which bits are what's going to endure and what's going to be a flash in the pan. With a building, the longevity is substantial. You said Aston Martin is a very timeless object, a sort of timeless design. It's contemporary, but it's classic. Do you think there's different standards of timelessness in architecture?
I think there probably are different standards, but at the end of the day, the same as an Aston Martin, you're designing a future collectible, and a building becomes a future icon. The icon may have another building next to it, but it's still iconic because it did it first, because it did something unusually. So it will always be recognized. And that's the timeless nature of the building then, because it was unique, it has a form which is unique, and it did something differently. It decided to partner with Aston Martin. Therefore, it's already unique. It's already very, very different. And I mentioned 108 years and 100,000 cars, 95% of those cars still exist. All the way back from 1913 to today, they still exist. You don't buy an Aston Martin to throw it away. And if you apply that to the building, you're buying something iconic, and you're buying into the flavor and DNA of something very iconic, a great partnership, and something which will have timeless credibility. It will be beautiful for 10, 15, 20, 35, 50 years. And that's really important in the way we use the detailing, use the materials. So even if something surpasses a carbon or a titanium or a 3D printed part, that early part is still going to look cool way out into the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess just as a sort of beautifully crafted piece of wooden trim or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I think of the Arco lamp designed in 1934, I believe. It would still look right in one of these apartments, and I think it's for us to develop exactly the same feeling in anything that goes into those apartments, that it becomes a future classic, a future timeless piece of design.
Do you have some aspirations for creating pieces for this building that might sort of exist outside of this building, for example, like like a lamp or?
Yeah, I would love to. And again, if someone wants to work with us in terms of developing something which appears first here, but then becomes part of a series of something, for sure. You know, I think when you're in such a special place, having a unique chair to enjoy the environment, a unique dining table, something where people can come and say, wow, you're in a beautiful place. But what is this table? It's designed by and it's from. Oh, wow, that's an incredible piece. So for sure, you need, whether it's a centerpiece, talking pieces of furniture, things that you enjoy, that you live with on a daily basis, that represent the building itself. Because actually, when you're in the building, you see out, but you don't see the building. Yes. So how do I connect to the building with the things that are in the apartment?
Yeah. And I guess finally, just talking about the building as a symbol on the skyline, and you alluded to a little bit earlier with the sort of the night lighting scheme. Is there a way that the building is going to be lit that will make it stand out from?
Absolutely, because we talked a lot about Miami is a fun place.
A neon bright place.
Absolutely, it's a bright place. It's known for art and design, and it's known for the kind of cross-fertilization of cultures. I think we had on that opening lunch that I talked about, I believe there are, again, I'm going to get the facts wrong, but well over 30 languages spoken in Miami. And so it's a melting pot of culture. And therefore it's exciting, because whenever that happens, there's excitement. And it's renowned for people going there to enjoy clearly the views, clearly the beautiful weather, but also this cross-fertilization of culture. And that means fun. So we wanted the building to be fun, to have a signature throughout its lighting, and the way the balustrades are lit, everyone will see from a long, long way away. Even we talked about doing something very unusual on the base of the swimming pool. So if you're flying over, then you would recognize the swimming pool and what's there. But I can't tell you what that is yet.
It feels like a good place to stop. Marek, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.